Good morning. I am Jeff Martin. I am from Clemson University, and I am the Executive Director of the Conference Center and Inn, where you're going to be for the next 2 days. And so I'm delighted to have you with us today and delighted to have you with us this morning at this program. I wanted to make sure everybody knew that as a gift to ITGA, the plenary sessions and this session is going to be taped. And so if anybody's uncomfortable with that, you have our deepest apologies. Just know that if you stay, you're going to be on tape. This tape will be used for promotional reasons with ITGA. It'll be on their website, of course edited with our professional staff in our production facility. And I would ask as a favor, just so as once we get rolling here, that you silence your phones so that we don't have a beep go on. Lindsay Newton is our moderator. We're going to be watching for Lindsay Newton to tell us to stop. Jeff Bright is the producer for this event, and all of the video work that you're going to see at the ITGA conference for the next 2 days is going to be done by students. And our students, Dallas, last name Dallas, Linderman, and Seth Christmas, and back in the booth in producing this event or directing this event is Caitlin Martin. So everybody say, hey, Caitlin. She's over there smiling. So I'm going to start our session with you. Delighted to have you with us, and Dr. Steve Gavazzi is going to be our first speaker. Before I do that, I just want to mention this book that one of our presenters has just written, Michael Fox, and Michael will be hosting a book signing. And as Steve and Mike and I have been working on this publication and the scholarly work that we've been doing, this has emerged as a very valuable piece of scholarly work. And I'm going to tell you, Mike didn't bring many copies, so if you want one, make sure you get one in a hurry. So, Dr. Stephen Gavazzi.
Good morning, everybody. I know this is going to be very difficult for me. I am a professor of human development and family science at The Ohio State University. And I'm used to walking around, and I gesture a lot with my hands, and we're taping, so I feel a little bit artificial standing here like this. So this is going to be a challenge for me, and I'm going to be occasionally looking over here so I don't have to keep looking back behind myself as we do the slides. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm a newbie with ITGA, and so I find myself having the double honor of not only being here for the first time, but also presenting for the first time at ITGA. So I'm very thrilled to be here and having such esteemed colleagues as Jeff Martin and Mike Fox, who will be co-presenting with me today. We're going to be doing a little bit of tag teaming. So either we're the Tres Amigos or the Three Stooges, or I don't know what it's going to be, but we'll see. By the end, we can poll you and find out what you think. Jeff had talked about the fact that we've been working on some scholarly work together. There's a brand new article. If you are part of a university system and you can get into Springer's first online, you can already access the article that we're going to be talking about today in a journal called Innovative Higher Education. And this got to be a very quick publication for the three of us. I hope that we light a fire under all of you today in the same way that we lit a fire under the editorial staff at this fine journal. They thought it was a very exciting piece of work. There's a lot more to come out of this as well, but all of this can be accessed already online. The actual hard print publication will occur in November of this year as well. So we have 3 universities that are represented here today, but we'll also be talking about a 4th university. And again, these are simply examples. In my case, it's actually an example of the university campus that I took over 3.5 years ago. And I actually think that we've moved the needle quite a bit since then. But we're using each of the universities, each of our universities, plus Queen's University, as simply examples of where, with a snapshot in time, you might begin to actually look at relationships between campuses and communities as being not unlike a marriage. And being a marriage and family therapist by training, this is something that came to me quite naturally. And in fact, as I've been telling lots of people, I've used my clinical skills more as dean and director in the last 3.5 years, with my faculty especially, than I have in the previous 20 years of being on the Columbus campus. So we want to take you through a little bit of the conceptualization of what it is that goes into this kind of work. And we also hope to create a dialogue with all of you about where you might find yourself and your situation, your town-gown relationship, and hopefully spark some additional conversation with you about how to refine and, in fact, expand upon some of the work that we already have put into print. So we're going to do hopefully 4 things for you. We're going to review the town-gown literature. We will give you just a brief snapshot of that, but I think we've actually, in the article, we've done a good job of capturing the essence of what's already been written from a scholarly perspective about towns and gowns. We're then going to create the typology, the 4-square typology, which hopefully all of you have. It looks like most of you do, as handouts. We're going to talk you quickly through that. And then we're going to actually present the case studies. Each of us will talk about the particular campus-community relationship that we're familiar with. Dr. Fox will actually be talking about 2 of them, so he'll get the chance to talk to you about 2 different typologies. And then we'll finally talk about a pilot data collection effort that I have undertaken on my campus. Hopefully it will actually begin to spread to the other regional campuses at The Ohio State University as a prelude then to making this kind of survey instrument available to everybody to actually utilize both on your campuses and in the communities in which you're working. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to look at the literature, and we actually, I think it's fair to say that there's some scholarly work out there that says the glass is half empty, that there are lots and lots of problems. Actually, Jim Hunt did a good job in the previous session talking about all of the problems, many of which are either student behavior related or land use related. And in fact, by and large, that's what most of the literature really talks about, are those issues as making the glass half empty. And then, of course, there's all the excitement. There are all the possibilities that exist, which of course is why most of us are here at ITGA, which is to talk about all the positive things, all of the opportunities that exist for us when we look at the campus and community in partnership together. So this is just a quote from one of the articles that you'll find in the article that talks about the half-empty side. This simply says, historically, town-gown relations have been a source of difficulty, frustration, and annoyance. I love that word, annoyance, for both the town and the university. That's the half-empty one, right? That's the, wow, you know, it'd be great if we had you behind a bubble and we really didn't have to do anything other than collect tax receipts from you, right? And vice versa, we'd really love to keep continuing to get water and sewer service from you as long as we didn't have to deal with you. So that's really that half-empty version of, you know, we're forced into this. It's an arranged marriage. It's not something that we're really very excited about. And then you get Dr. Fox. And Dr. Fox will tell us instead that, and I'll just go to the end of the quote, which is, if you don't have a university within your midst as a town, you wish you did. And so really 2 very, very different, right, dichotomous views of campus and community relationships. But that's really the state of the literature right now. You don't find people talking about both sides of it. So I think that that's actually one of the contributions that the 3 of us have made in our writing, which is to say it's a both-and story. There are both opportunities and challenges. And again, not unlike marriages and other intimate relationships, there's not all good and there's not all bad. And so that's part of what we really want to talk you through then in terms of talking about these typologies that we've discussed. So this is the 2x2, the 4-square typology that we want to talk about today. It's based on 2 dimensions, 2 core dimensions, and it gives us 4 different typologies in which to actually look at and examine town-gown relationships. This was actually based on very early marital research. It was in the mid-60s. 2 scholars, actually in the New York area, Suber and Haroff, had done some of the first evaluations of marriages. They had interviewed several hundred couples in the New York City area, and they began to develop a typology for what do different marriages look like. And so we've simply borrowed rather liberally from that original conceptualization of marriage. This, by the way, this conceptualization exists today. It's been refined. Marital researchers use this in a lot of different ways. They call them different things, but by and large, we haven't moved very far from talking about marital typologies in terms of these basic kinds of categories. So we have the harmonious relationship, and that's going to be the one that everyone will be striving to have. Sounds good too, harmonious, right? We all want to be in harmonious relationships. Next down in terms of where people are satisfied, ironically, is actually the traditional relationship. And the traditional relationship is what we actually find most towns and gowns in the situation of. So there's something about this relationship which has worked for many people. However, especially in the article and to some extent to what we will get into today, that kind of relationship, the traditional relationship, is under assault. And it's under assault because of economic reasons, largely again land use reasons, where as we walk through this typology, you will see it's going to be harder and harder for people to ignore each other and go on your own blissful separate paths. The third type that we're going to talk about is the conflictual type, or conflicted type. Suber and Haroff actually called it the conflict habitual site, which basically meant you're in the habit of having fights with one another. People are nodding their heads. Some of you probably have those kinds of town-gown relationships, if not marriages, but don't say that out loud, we're being taped. We'll talk about that one as there's something to it. There's clearly something going on there. There are things of value to be fought over, but obviously things are not as rosy as they could be. And then finally, the last one that we're going to talk about, which will actually be the one that I will be describing, is a devitalized relationship. It's actually the least satisfactory of all of them. And we'll take you through some of the examples of why that's the case. So all of this is built on two dimensions, as I had mentioned earlier. One is the amount of effort or energy that you're putting into the relationship, and the other is the comfort level that you have inside of this relationship. And they are reciprocally influential on each other. So in order to have a lot of comfort, you need a lot of effort. In order to have a lot of effort, though, you need to have a lot of comfort. So really these interplay, again, in town-gown relationships in much the same way as they interplay with regards to marriages and other intimate relationships. So the energy level is energy or effort level is exactly what it sounds like. It's the amount of activities, the amount of involvement that you have with your partner. And the comfort level is also what it sounds like. It's the perception that you're involved in a satisfactory and mutually reciprocal relationship, whether again it's the marriage or the town-gown relationship. And so we're going to use these to actually describe what's going on with our 4 case examples. And up first then is Jeff Martin to talk to you about Clemson University.
In 2 months, I'm going to celebrate my 30th anniversary with my lovely wife. And as I was thinking about this opportunity to be with you today, I asked her, I said, honey, do we have a harmonious relationship? And I'm responding as she responded. And she didn't respond. And the response was, you know, I'm very comfortable in this relationship, but it's a lot of work. And that really fits well with the theme of the presentation that we're offering with you today, is the amount of energy and work and investment that has to take place into a town and gown relationship, much like a marriage, is to achieve that comfort level. And the harmonious relationship, Clemson was selected, and we're very proud of our relationship here at Clemson University. And as evidenced by the Princeton Review, has identified us for 5 years running as the top town-gown relationship in the country. And our mayor, Larry Abernathy, past mayor who's recently deceased, used to have a saying that Clemson is a town of which millions aspire and thousands enjoy. And at the university, we talk about our students who spend 4 years at the university and then the rest of their life trying to get back to Clemson. So it's a culture that has been created over 40 years. It's a culture that looks to student as friend, community partner, and contributor to the overall community. It's a relationship that looks to resolve issues, not sit on conflict, or to look for common goals and find ways in which we can create an environment that's comfortable not only for the community members, but also for those students. How many of you have experienced your over the hedges discussion with your neighbor who would say, this would be a great town if it wasn't for the students? But in fact, this would be no town if it wasn't for the students. And the students create a unique culture, a tremendous sense of energy in this city and in this community that we enjoy, we embrace, and we engage in as we work hard to build that culture. But make no mistake, all things are not perfect in Clemson, South Carolina. Like all marriages, we have to work hard for our differences, just as Jim Hunt pointed out today, many of those items that he suggested, living in the community, student behavior, some of those issues. And the intent of the comfort level is we want to try to solve those issues. There's a desire to do that. Now, the key to us is, where does the energy come from? Now, all of you have read in your information about the International Town Gown Association meeting here in Clemson, hosted by the City of Clemson and hosted by Clemson University. Let me be real with you. That's what we're really hosted by, is the Joint City University Advisory Board. It is an organization that was established by Mayor Abernathy and then President Walter Cox in 1994. So this is an organization that has two primary missions. One, identify those issues and help resolve those issues and create those C's that Jim Hunt talked about earlier: communication, collaboration, and consensus on the kind of issues that we deal with here in our community. The second primary responsibility of Joint City, as I call it, we call it, Joint City, is to program to build community. The ITGA conference is building community for us. And we think you will see that when you go downtown this evening. You're going to see a lot of excitement downtown. People are glad that you are here. People know who you are, and people are glad that you're here. Thanks mainly because of the work of Lindsay Newton and some of those folks. The other thing that we do is we build community through a very unique program that Steve and Michelle, our conference chairs, put together, called the Community Crew Event, where 36 teams of 6 members use university crew boats called skiffs, right? Skiffs, where we compete with each other. And my conference center team has had a team the last 2 years, and I'm delighted to tell you that we finished 3rd in our heat the first year. And this year we finished 4th. The captain was the reason we did not do well. So there's a tremendous amount of energy. Joint City is made up of 9 members from the university appointed by the president, 9 members of the community appointed by the mayor. Listen to who's on this committee. And when you hear who's on the committee, think about the strings of communication that open up as we do this. People don't get surprised in this community if Joint City does its job well. So representing the university are the graduate student body president, the undergraduate student body president, the staff senate president, the faculty senate president, and then there are 5 standing members, 2 of which are on the executive council, the chief public affairs officer and our chief diversity officer. But key as administrative officers on the executive council is they have direct access to the president. So the president knows what's going on. The other 3 members are a senior student affairs official, who happens to be Steve, myself, and the chief of police. Now, the community members are represented by the mayor, the city administrator, the planning director, the Chamber of Commerce executive, and members of city council, and the chief of police. So we have the chief of police of the city and the chief of police of the community working very closely together, and that's incredibly important. So, like marriage, we have conflict, we work hard, and we risk ourselves to evaluate ourselves. And I will leave you with just 2 examples of that. Crossy Cox is a member of City Council. Crossy's right here. Crossy and I work together with a group of students to simply ask the question, what do we do well in terms of town and gown relationships? Look at ourselves, evaluate ourselves. Undergraduate students, and we're going to share with you that report, and it's a pass around, if you will. The second thing I'll share with you in terms of the energy that we invest is, like many communities, all of you do strategic plans. Communities do them, universities do them. When the city of Clemson just did its 10-year comprehensive plan, they added a chapter. The chapter is entitled Town-Gown Relationships. And I've got a draft of that that's going to be a pass around as well, and I'll be glad to talk with you more about that. So we're not perfect. We know we have our challenges, but we have conduits and opportunities to have great communication and opportunities to resolve issues that we have. Let me pass it off to Dr. Fox.
Morning, everyone. As you can see, we've had this relationship over the last year or so in terms of our own communities, and I think that's what draws so many of us to these conferences each year. The other great thing is that we've been able to move towards that international relationship. Now, of course, it's a very romantic idea to think of Canada as international. When you think of traveling internationally, perhaps Canada isn't your destination, at least for 8 out of 12 months of the year. Which is our spring, right? The idea of town and gown relationships, of course, and the typology that we've borrowed heavily now from the literature, and that's been the real welcome addition, I think, of Steve to the work that we've been looking at. Jeff and I have been collaborating for a couple of years now, particularly with our students and relating to community. So I was able to spend some time here in Clemson over the past 3 or 4 years, which has just been wonderful. But I think all of us as well understand that relationship concept when we have meaningful others in our lives, and it's very much a continuum, especially again as we talk about, I shouldn't say I know I'm going to celebrate my 32nd anniversary on July 3rd, somewhere in there. But also in terms of my own community, and I'm looking at Mount Allison University, which is in New Brunswick on the east coast of Canada. We're going to be celebrating our 175th anniversary as a university in the town of Sackville, New Brunswick, which of course 175 years, we've had a few presidents and a few mayors over the years. In fact, the university, like many of your institutions, predates the community in which you live. That notion then, and my particular example here is of the traditional aspect, the traditional part of the typology. High comfort and low effort. And I think many of you probably in the room, as we look at that continuum of the 4 types, I guess the 5th would be, utopia, perhaps. No university, no communities ever going to be there. But again, our hope is to be that, like in a marriage, the perfect relationship based on all of those factors. And one goes through hills and valleys and challenges in one's life, etc. Every time perhaps we hit a bump in the road, that's the time we remember, oh, what a challenge this is, and perhaps we should be investing a little more in this. The traditional aspect, and we all do this in our own lives, that old comfortable pair of slippers or that pair of jeans that just, you can't throw them away, right? Because they're just so comfortable. I should get a new one. I should do that. I should fix the holes in them. And people get very comfortable in their own skin and in their own lives and in their own communities and indeed in their own universities in those communities. And so this is one that is characterized by the idea of again, energy and comfort, where things have come quite Naturally, as we heard in the first talk this morning, when times are good, universities and education is this higher societal goal. Who can argue with having a college or a university in your community, or multiple colleges and universities in your community? And yet the reality that all of us are facing are those daily, weekly, monthly, yearly challenges, and that very unusual cycle of the academic year. Other communities, as I suggested and as Steve quoted at the start, only wish they had that level of investment. Indeed, what we've seen with the rise and fall of economies, the growth and the decline, 2007 close in our minds, but also looking at post-war periods, et cetera, when a lot of our universities were developed and certainly gained in terms of being a national and regional and local goal. This is what has built this very traditional university campus. So my own campus at 175 years, unlike perhaps what we've seen here with the Harmonious campus, that's what we aspire to, the sort of relationship. And again, getting these best practices or current practices at what other campuses are doing in their communities is really probably why all of us are here. But a traditional model is one, again, that is not without its problems. One that is being, as Steve suggested, very, very much curtailed by economic conditions, by rises and falls, both the demand for places in university, but also limited fundings. And in communities where that only hope really is the value of university, the value of education, having this spillover or this mutual relationship with the community that we're in. So this is the traditional one where, again, at my own university, Mount Allison, we have a national magazine ranking system, and we've been consistently ranked #1 as an undergraduate university in Canada for, I think, 17 out of the last 23 years that they've been doing it. Presidents have come and gone, but they tend to enjoy 2 full terms. Our current president has had his term extended a further 2 years, so 10, 12-year terms. I think it's safe to say that comfort then becomes one on a traditional relationship where the university, in times when things are going well, it tends to be a very good partner. Things seem to happen and we have resources. Just look at the growth and the changes in student affairs, for example, since World War II. Those of you that are long serving in universities knew that student affairs really used to be kind of the part of the work of the faculty, not always their greatest moments as faculty members, but that we've now refined and professionalized this, and the challenges that have come along, stress and mental health now are top of mind for many universities, as we see around our countries and around the world. But you get into this when you have consistent, as our institution does, consistent high rankings. So we have lots of students coming into simply by that ranking. It's an enormous recruitment. The amount of money and effort that goes into reputation and recruitment is important. I might take away, I mean, the joint university, that might be an interesting take on a term as well, in terms of a town and gown committee being part of that recruitment, that you get along. Do people choose a college or a university because of the community that it's in? When you choose Harvard, is it because Cambridge is such a wonderful place? That relationship then in your own communities is critically important. Distance from campus, state requirements, educational requirements within a government system become tied into that relationship. But once you do it, that's the old saying, in terms of teaching and learning. If you're an educator, there are 2 ways you can enter into that relationship. You can teach that first year and then repeat it 30 times and retire. Right? Never changing a thing. That's comfort, and that's low energy. But that's not the way teaching and learning works. That's not the way town and gown relations work. But in a community, in a relationship where you have mayors, in our particular jurisdiction, every 3 or 4 years we have a new mayor and council. And some universities, of course, you have these 10 and 15 and 20 and 30-year presidencies. Those days seem to be gone. So now we have, well, in some cases, 8-month, 1 year, 2 year, and we're constantly in a sea of change in both the town and the gown. And this, of course, is so critical when we understand it in terms of the typology, in terms of the analogy of the marriage. In my own community then, in my own university, and this is where we want you to place yourselves along this continuum, where, and you're all asking yourself, where is my institution in terms of the four types that we're presenting here? My own institution, the mayor of the town worked for the university on the Buildings and Grounds Committee for 40 years. He cut grass, he worked in the arena. He was elected. He's what they call a good old boy. He knows everyone. He drives around town, writes down lists of where the potholes are, waves to everyone. And this is his real strength as a mayor, that he's connected to the community. In that time, of course, as being mayor now, entering his third year, there has not been one meeting with the university. And indeed, in the previous 4 years, there were no meetings with the university. The president, who's coming up to 9 years in office, has other fish to fry, as they say. He is leading a university, Canada's nationally ranked university. He's off at the capital city and off at various university presidents, and the role of a university may or may not reflect what goes on in the town, this wee town of 5,500 people. And so it is a comfortable level. Our president consistently calls it City Hall and City Council, and that really makes our town of 5,000, you know, being called a city would be nice, but in fact, the president has never been to our town hall, has never been to a council meeting. And this, as we heard in our first talk this morning, would go a long way to making that relationship happen. We have not had a town and gown committee, despite my wonderful book that gets circulated amongst no one in my community. So again, as Mark Twain said, maybe to be an expert you must go away to be an expert somewhere else. But this is where the comfort comes into play. Why do we need that? Everything's fine, everything's fantastic, everything's wonderful, as so many people say about their own relationships with others, until of course something goes wrong. And as we heard this morning again, that's when so many of our relationships come and boil over and come to the fore. The old frogs in a pot of water, you know, that slowly heats don't realize they're in trouble. It's when you have that boiling water and drop something into it. That's not the best time to engage in this. So traditional, no deficit at the university, increasing students, a good sense of retention, growth over the years, a wonderful sort of level of comfort there. As we say in the paper, it's basically one of, you know, us and them, coexistence perhaps, at worst perhaps being described as benign neglect, and one that you just take for granted, and this is unfortunate. I also have the ability then to look at, again, you're going to think even though I was talked about as the glass half full, I get to look at the conflicted environment. And I choose, again, not because of anything against this particular university. It brings, again, back to the international relationship, the idea of the conflicted university. And this is Queen's University in Ontario, Southern Ontario, Canada, just across Lake Ontario from New York State. And Queen's University has a very high and very respected, again, over 150, also probably 175 years of history with the city of Kingston, the former capital of Canada before Ottawa. Again, something nobody ever knows. The idea of, let alone that Ottawa is the capital of Canada, but Kingston was the first Prime Minister's home, a very long tradition. The Royal Military College and University is also in Kingston, Ontario, and a provincial college as well. A very long tradition, but why do we call it conflicted? Why would you name any relationship as conflicted? And of course, this is what brings, again, the boiling point, the points of friction that we talk about and really, unfortunately, immerse ourselves in many of our jobs, many of our roles in our communities. And it's one of an ongoing set of discomfort. And it goes back to that post-war experience period. A traditional neighborhood, and tell me if you've heard this one, very traditional Victorian homes, early settlement, etc. Beautiful, stately homes in a lovely neighborhood and a small college. that simply exploded in a post-war period where all veterans were promised full education by the government. Everyone, chicken in every pot, I believe your president suggested. I also see a community then that welcomes back and celebrates education as the solution to local, national and global problems. We have the start of the United Nations. We see a world then embraced in manufacturing and industry and education as fueling that. And that's certainly what Queen's was part of. But in that initial period, the government of Ontario gave Queen's the right of eminent domain. They gave them the right to expropriate land. Imagine if your university, and maybe some of them do, had the right to just buy up and take over any land that they see as being needed for the expansion of their university, because it's for education, it's for the public good. And there's the nub, there's the as Steve suggested, that critical point of land use and education and the role of the university. And as part of the conflict, many argue that Queen's and the community of Kingston have never got over that. I said to a group yesterday that we met with for the certificate program that when you come to a council meeting, for example, and a resident stands up and talks about that horrible student that urinated on their lawn, and there are children nearby, and what is it going to take for the university to do, and oh my goodness, and everyone focuses on the problem. Then you find out that this happened in 1963. But that is the single image, the single relationship that people remember, and everything else is framed. And much like those relationships, right? You've all got that one moment, the time I forgot to pick up my kids in preschool. My partner will never let me forget that, right? And if we're having a conflict, it goes back to that time. What harm was done? I mean, the poor child sitting on the curb outside the school at 10 to 6, and a neighbor brought her home, and my wife just went into a panic. But it always goes back to that. And now, even in fact, my children are all in their 20s now, but if my wife and I have even a difference of opinion, they still to this day ask, are you going to get a divorce over this? I didn't pay the phone bill. Are you going to get a divorce? And it goes back to those moments of conflict. And our communities and our relationships are riddled with them. And it goes to the much more serious. And the case in Queen's, and the reason we selected it, is because now Queen's has the notoriety of campus neighborhood parties. And again, stop me if you've heard this in your community or your awareness. Students in near campus neighborhoods. So you've got that underlying feeling that the university should have never been allowed to expand, and they went from 1,000 students to 10,000 to 20 to 50,000 students. And they just take over. It's the blob that ate, whatever city, and it's this plague on our community. That's the rub. That's the conflict, and it's played over year after year after year. Administrators and city officials focus on the negatives. We've got riot police. We've got tactical squads. We've got all of the wherewithal of armed combat for education, and the amount of tax money and the amount of time spent and the avoidance that goes on there. This is the notion, this is the concept, and that's why it's such high energy, high effort to be constantly battling. Oh, we have to go to another meeting and it's going to be filled with conflict. Maybe we could just avoid it. Maybe we could just leave it alone. But of course, at some point when things get out of hand, as they did in about 2007 in Kingston, where you had 7,000 to 8,000 people showing up, riot police being brought in from other cities, and $1 million cost for a one-weekend homecoming event, then you'd bring in the counselor. Then you bring in the strategic enrollment planning that needs to go on. As David Lossing, one of the speakers at this conference, suggests from Michigan State, that this relationship, this dance that we engage in as communities and universities will never end in divorce. So deal with it. Get some counseling. And so strategic environmental, there's my other hat, strategic enrollment management, town and gown relations committees, all of the subunits of planning and management that go on in any university community have to have this ongoing relationship, as we heard from Mr. Hunt this morning, as we've heard from Jeff this morning, that Clemson now 20 years later is starting to see, and has certainly we will experience the fruits of their labor. Not when things are horrible, when we're fighting and yelling at each other, but in fact in an ongoing way. It's not easy. Just like any relationship, you have to continue the dance. It takes two to tango, and that's what takes the enormous amount of energy. Why not have a positive outcome rather than completely reversing and going back to the negatives? That person that urinated on my lawn back in the 60s. Let's look to the future. Let's look at those economic challenges. And that's what a place, I mean, it is a good news story from Queens. They did engage in this. They have a strategic plan. They made a wonderful set of efforts. The principal, which again is hearkening back, but the president of the university and the mayor, who is a graduate of Queen's University, coming together. But of course, dealing with homecoming, they got rid of homecoming, and then suddenly, one day, as the mayor read the paper, homecoming has been reinstated at Queen's University. What? Hadn't heard that. When your mayor, when your council get their news about the university in the newspaper and in the media, this is not a good thing. So we had tweeting now, of course, so the mayor goes to the epicenter of the homecoming. Another party, only 3,000 showed up this year, but still lots of noise, lots of partying, lots of issues, and tweeting, this is not good, to the president of the university. The president of the university, not even in town. So we're back to it again. So you can have those plans, you can have that ongoing effort and everyone involved, but it is, as suggested by Jeff, a continuous relationship in good times and in bad. Now we're going to move on to the next one. Thanks.
Can I ask a question before you complete?
Certainly.
In your traditional, which is from your college, so in the 9 years that the president's been there has been no conflict with the town?
Ongoing conflicts of a minor nature, but nothing terribly out of the ordinary.
Everyone, both the president and the mayor, are sort of satisfied with things, and they see no reason to.
They see no reason why, you know, just in any relationship, they're, give and take, live and let live attitude, kids today, huh? It's safe to say that, as suggested by Jeff, over the hedges in the neighborhoods, as they're picking out the red beer cups, there are those talks about, here we go again. I've always said in a traditional relationship that cycle of the year, where would we be without the university? It is now a single industry in our community. All of the other industries are gone, so there's one employer. I mean, the schools and the hospital are the second largest, and again, it's because of that relationship. But by and large, it gets resolved. It's not a strategic approach in any stretch, no.
In Queens College, there was some communication.
Absolutely.
With the plan, but it sounds like nobody cares about it.
Well, again, best made plans. Now we have to actualize them. And the first couple of years went very well. The relationships, again, using experts. You have world leading planners and social conflicts and family therapists at the university and in the community, engaging them and doing that research and living your lives in your community. This is where you have some successes, definitely, but you've got to stick to it. Change is constant. That's the problem. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm now going to speak briefly about the campus that I took over 3.5 years ago after I had been previously spending the 20 years on what is considered the main campus, the Columbus campus. Actually, our university talks about one university, 6 locations. We actually have 6 campuses. And so we're in a very interesting era right now, to use a term that I think Mike had talked about in terms of benign neglect. Historically, the regional campuses throughout the Ohio State system had suffered charitably under benign neglect. It actually at times was much worse than that. Probably the most common question that I got when I first took the job 3.5 years ago on the regional campus, other than where's your campus again? Because we actually sit outside of the main body of the town. Actually, Mansfield is a fairly large city. It's 47,000. But we sit out on the periphery. We're actually 4 miles away from the center of town, and so people always talk about us as being out in the sticks. But the other than asking me the question, where are you, the other question that I get all the time is, why do you need any money from us? Because we pay our football coach $4 million a year, and so the statement that's normally said to me is, well, if you're paying your football coach that much money, then you certainly don't need any resources from the community. Little do they realize that we are tubs on our own bottom, and actually we send $800,000 a year from our campus to the Columbus campus for goods and services. And so it's a very difficult relationship at best to manage when you're already a regional campus and you're trying to figure out what your place is in the university system, let alone in the community that you're involved in. I want to talk about this relationship that I inherited as being this last type, this devitalized type. It's a very interesting place that you get to in relationship development because you don't start there. You don't start as a devitalized relationship because the D means that something happened to the vitalized, right? So at one point in time, the relationship was much better, or at least there was much more energy that was being put into the relationship. But something, I don't think public urination probably would qualify, but there's usually one signal large event, if not a series of large events, that turn the energy spigot off. And people go from largely conflicted relationships to saying, you know what? This just isn't working anymore. We're not going to put the energy into it. And I believe that that's the campus that I took over 3.5 years ago. And I can point to several, but I'm going to give you one example of something that happened that created this particular situation. The local hospital system had run a nursing program very successfully for almost 80 years. And they asked The Ohio State University to take over the nursing school, which sounded like a great idea. And in fact, everyone was in favor of it other than the dean of the College of Nursing at the time, who was not interested in undergraduate education. She was interested in graduate education. And she also had a very myopic view of what quality programs were. So in essence, especially in the era at the time, this was almost 10 years ago now, if the dean of the College of Nursing said, we're not going to take a program over, we're not going to take it over. So no champion emerged for this, but it was devastating to the community. And in fact, they saw this as a direct affront to the community. In essence, it was, how dare you not take our, and it was really seen as our nursing program. Fortunately for the town, a local private university took it over, and to great fanfare, and came in as the saviors, right? So this private university then became the beloved of the area, and we became the afterthought. We became the people who let people down. And I heard that consistently. And this was, again, public urination in '60 or a failure to take over a nursing school 10 years ago. I mean, this was really a traumatic event. And it led to this sense of being let down, and that was only, by the way, the latest in a series of things that had happened between the campus and the community. And again, largely out of the local hands. These were decisions that were being made by central administration on the Columbus campus, but nevertheless seen as very local. So there was this sense of a lack of energy, a lack of enthusiasm, on top of the fact that we really were psychologically a great distance away from people. I tell this story, first of all, as a cautionary tale, because this is where conflicted relationships can end up. You can get to a point where one of the partners just gives up. And while a divorce will never happen, certainly a lot of estrangement can happen. And again, that's only good until the next time something boils over, and then you find yourself now in a crisis situation and without good relationships to rely on. So one of the things that we've been paying a lot of attention to in Mansfield the last 3.5 years are the kinds of things that have been talked about here. There are the kinds of things where we look at how it is that we rebuild those relationships so that we can get away from the kinds of things that we actually have been seeing. Now, one of the things that we wanted to talk about as a way of moving this forward, because, you know, conceptualizations are good as far as they go. They get people thinking, right? And hopefully this is something that you read the article or you've been to the presentation today and you start thinking about, well, where am I? Where's my campus and community? Where do I fit in all of this? But what we want to do is we want to take it to the next step. We actually think that there's a way of measuring this. We actually think there are some fairly easy ways of measuring it. And so one of the things that I vowed with my partners, my writing partners, to do was I was actually going to pilot what we thought was a decent way of getting at these twin dimensions of effort and comfort inside of my own community. Now, one of the nuances of what we did was, since I also have a co-located technical college on my campus, we decided that we were actually going to look at the relationships not only between Ohio State Mansfield and the community, but also North Central State College and the community. And in fact, over the last 3.5 years, that's one of the things that we've actually been building up, is the relationship not only with the community, but also with our co-located technical partner. And we wanted to know something about that. So we had a series of structured questions. They were on a Likert scale, low effort to high effort in a lot of different areas. And also we had open-ended questions where we asked people questions like, what could Ohio State Mansfield do to create a better environment for the community, and the same thing for North Central. And then we also asked the question in reverse, what can the community do? We actually asked a very specific question, which has led to some very interesting answers. We asked, what could the community do to create a more college town atmosphere? A lot of great ideas were generated out of just that single question, but we also got a segment of the population, it wasn't large, but it was fairly significant, it was probably around 20%, who said, college town, that's the last thing that we want. We think of burning couches and overturned cars. And again, that's never happened in Mansfield. But it's the picture of what has happened, very real things that have happened in Columbus and splashed across all the news. So, one of the lessons about this survey from the qualitative standpoint is you got to really watch what kind of questions you're asking, right? Because there's different meanings that are ascribed to different words that you use. But the good news that I bring to you is that the initial way of having measured effort and energy has given us some very important systematic information to look at. Now I'm going to share just 2 pieces with you, but this is a teaser because I'm going to come back next year to the conference and I'll present the actual data, hopefully along with data from some of these other universities that we talked about today. So one of them was, and I have to draw back a bit, and I wish we did this survey last year, but we launched a capital campaign last year, and one of the things that we did was a feasibility study. So basically it was a high qualitative conversation with the community about here are the ideas that we have about what we'd like to have funded, and how likely is it that you're going to open up your wallet and help us out. Well, the business community hated everything. Hated everything. And in fact, so much so that our consultant came back to us and said, you really need to use this information. You need to go out. And so I actually made the rounds. And I spent almost 9 months meeting with every business or industry owner I could find and asking them the question, what do you want from us? Which led to a lot of other things besides the capital campaign. I mean, I found out all kinds of things, just really, really great information. But one of the things that came to me fairly clearly was they wanted some vital connection with our students. So inevitably, we fashioned up a business and industry internship program. We got lucky as heck that the state of Ohio was giving away money for this at the exact same time in an act called Jobs Ohio. So we applied for and successfully got this money where we paid our own students to go work for employers. Wow. How powerful is that, right? And the proof is in the pudding, because when you take out, we have 695 usable data points from community members. When you take out the 87 business owners and compare them to the rest of the population, they're a standard deviation higher in both their perceptions of our energy level and also the comfort level that they have with us. So again, I don't have the pre-post with the exact same questions, but it's a very compelling story to think about when you start to look at that grid of effort and comfort level. And so again, one of the things that I hope to do in terms of making a contribution with my colleagues is to push some of this qualitative work forward. I basically said this already, so I'm going to go on. What we did do, I want to point out, is we did this on the cheap. I got a couple of questions last night after the reception. People were saying, well, where'd you find the money to do this? I used SurveyMonkey. And it was really easy. What we basically did was I went back to the Chamber of Commerce, I went to all the school districts, I went to United Way, and I went to all the media outlets, and I said, I need your help in promoting this. It cost me 2 hours of my time on SurveyMonkey, and I'd never used SurveyMonkey before, so if you've used it, it probably won't even take you 2 hours to do it. Set it up, ran it for 3 weeks, opened and closed the data set, and got almost 700 responses, which was really, really good. A good smattering. I also have, thank you, the hook is beginning now. Have to wrap this up, but I'll just tell you another part of the data piece that I found fascinating. We also surveyed our campus. So we asked faculty, staff, students, and board members, because we both have advisory boards, North Central State as well as us. And 2 little bits of information. One, we can compare what the people on our campus think versus what people in the community think. Boy, does my campus got it wrong. I mean, the campus thinks we're held in this really high esteem. And when you look, because we use the exact same questions, the exact same measure, so we can look at just the mean differences, they're significantly different, as you might expect that they are. So this is information that's hot off the press, so when this goes out, my campus is now going to read about this at the ITGA, and they're going to go, oh, there he goes again. So that's important information to take back to my campus, right? That we need to do something about a more realistic way of looking at what we think about our relationships versus what people in the community are saying that they are. The other thing is, the very interesting thing is, no one knows who my board members are. I find that fascinating because they're all community leaders, but they're not identified that way. And they're not doing enough, I don't know if I don't give them enough lapel pins or whatever it is, that they're not being identified in the community as being part of my advisory board, nor are the North Central people either. So that's another clue for us. And again, these are things that you just might not think about until and unless you're out asking these kinds of questions in the community. We did want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to stop it here. I'm not even going to advance this, but I do want one last thing, and that's to introduce Kim Griffo in the back and thank her, because if it wasn't for Kim, we would not be here today. So thank you, Kim. And now we'll take questions.
Before we start the questions, we've got 2 minutes for questions, and if y'all are available after the session to maybe talk to people out in the lobby, we can do that, but 2 minutes in this room.
So I got a quick question. If there's been an estrangement in the town based on the decision on the nursing school, and now you come around and say we want to be friends again, how do you convince the other side to join into a discussion after they were burned before?
Well, and thank you. So the question repeated is, if you're estranged, how is it that you reapproach your partner? One of the things is that, first of all, recognize there are multiple partners and there are multiple people who were, quote unquote, harmed by that decision. So one of the things that you have to go in recognizing is you may get very different things when you ask, what do you need to repair the harm? Really a kind of an approach to healing that relationship. And you may get very different things from business owners than you may get from the healthcare professionals, than you may get from who knows what. But the important part is to actually ask the question. It's actually, you're able to tell, I think part of it is telling the story. And in my case, it was telling a story about how out of hand, it was out of all of our local hands. These were decisions that were being made on high. And I think that it's not to say we weren't responsible for it, because we're still part of one university, but I think it's also helping people to understand how those decisions are made, which is also an opportunity to talk to people about other things, like I have no control over how much money we pay our football coach. So sometimes it's just instructive to be able to have those kinds of conversations, but I think it's owning it, and then I think it's asking people how to move on from there. Anything else in the last 1 minute that we have? I'm being given the evil eye in the back. I will be around for the rest of the conference, as will be Mike and Jeff. So thank you very, very much for being here.